right, so we're going to talk about special right triangles. And the first one we're going to talk about is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So what that means is you have a 90 degree, you have a right triangle, and then the other two angles are 45 degrees. And so you're copying all of this down into your spiral notebook, okay? And so because both of the angles are 45 degrees, we would know that this is an isosceles triangle, with the 45-degree angles are your base angles. So if it's an isosceles triangle, we know the legs are congruent. And so then we know the legs are the sides opposite the 45-degree angle. So we know those are congruent to each other, okay? And so the reason that this is a special right triangle is because if I wanted to find the length of the three sides of a triangle, they all fall in a particular pattern of ratios. So if you know one leg, which we'll call that x, you'll know also that the other leg is x. And then to find the hypotenuse, and remember the hypotenuse is across from the right angle, the hypotenuse is the ratio, the leg times the square root of 2. So if you know one bit of information on this, on a special 45, 45, 90 triangle, you will know how to find, you should be able to find all the rest of the sides. Okay, so let's try some examples. So in an example 1, we have this triangle here. And because we have a 90-degree angle and a 45-degree angle there, then we know this other angle that isn't written is a 45-degree angle as well. So now we know we are dealing with a 45, 45, 90 triangle, where these two sides are congruent to each other because they are legs. So if we have to work into the proportions, we know the legs have the value of x, and then the hypotenuse will have the value x root 2, okay? So if we already know that x is equal to 2, then we know that this other leg, or what was written as v, would also be 2. So in this case, we know that v is equal to 2. And so now if we want to find u, we're going to plug in or substitute the fact that we know that x is 2, and then we're going to plug it in for the x root 2. So to find the side u, we know we have x root 2, and we know that x is 2. So then this is 2 times root 2. So now we know that this length over here for u is really 2 square roots of 2. And then the other two legs are also 2. And so that's what we're going to do to be able to find all the missing legs. Okay. All right, so let's try another example. Example 2. We have a 45-degree angle written, and then we have a 90-degree angle. So we should be clear that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. And because of that, we know that these are the two sides that are congruent. And so then we should be able to find all the missing sides. So we know that they fall into the ratio. This side is x, this side is x, and this side is going to be x times the square root of 2. So in this case, we already know that x is going to be equal to 5 times the square root of 2. So we know that y is also 5 root 2 because they have the same measurement. And now we need to go through and find this, which we know we take our x value and we multiply it by the square root of 2. So in this case, we plug it in. We know our x is really 5 root 2 already. So I'm just substituting in x for what we already know it is, times root 2. And this is where the practice with the radicals come in play. Now we know that we can multiply 5, and then we can multiply the radicals, which gives me 5 times root 4. Then we have to simplify. So the square root of 4 is 2, so this is really 5 times 2 outside of the radical sign, which is 10. So now that we know that this length here is 10. So this triangle has a side that's 5 root 2, another side that's 5 root 2, and the hypotenuse has a length of 10. Okay. All right, let's try a third example. So in this case, we have a 90-degree angle and then we have a 45-degree angle given, so we know that this other angle is a 45-degree angle. So now we're looking for that these two sides are the sides that are going to be congruent, and we know that the hypotenuse is 17. So if we stick with our ratios, we know this side is x, this side is x, and this side is x root 2. Okay? So now what I like to do, we need to figure out what x is. So I'm going to go ahead. I know that x root 2 is equal to 17 because it told us the hypotenuse, which falls into that ratio, x root 2. So now what we're going to do, we need to solve for x. So I need to get x by itself. So now this is just equation work. That means I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 2. Okay? So the square root of 2's cancel. So now I'm left with x is equal to 17 divided by the square root of 2. Okay, so we're almost there. And so what you should remember is that we don't like radicals in our denominator. So now we have to clean that up. So we almost have what x is. And remember, to do that, we have to rationalize by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by root 2. So now we're going to multiply across. So now we know that this is 17 root 2 divided by root 4. And then we're looking to see what we can simplify. So now we have 17 root 2 over the square root of 4 is really 2. And then I look to see if I can simplify, which I can't. So now that I know that x is really 17 root 2 divided by 2. So that's the length of the legs. So that means this leg in is equal to 17 root 2. And I know that m is also equal to 17 root 2. Okay? So now we found the length of all three sides. And let's do one more example. So we have a 45-degree angle and a 90-degree angle. So we know the third angle must also be a 45-degree angle. So now I know that we have a 45, 45, 90, with these two sides being the legs. So now if I just fill in our ratio here, I know this has a proportion x, x, and this one is x root 2. So now we know that the hypotenuse is x root 2, and so now we got to figure out what x is. So we just set up the equation. We know that x root 2 is equal to 8 root 5. And so now as we're working this out, we just want to figure out what x is. So in order to solve for x, I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 2. So the square root of 2's cancel here. I'm left with x is equal to 8 root 5 divided by root 2. And now we're almost there. The only thing that we should recognize here is that we don't like radicals in the denominator. So now we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by root 2. So now we know that this should be equal to 8 root 10 divided by root 4. Then we can multiply under the radical signs. And then we simplify. So I can't simplify root 10 anymore, so that stays 8 root 10. And then root 4 is really 2. Now in this case, we can simplify here. We can reduce the fraction, so that becomes 4 root 10. So now we know that x is 4 times the square root of 10. So we know that the length of the leg, so y is equal to 4 root 10, and this x value here is 4 root 10. So now we have the lengths of all three sides, and those are the exact lengths. So sometimes you'll see questions that are asked for the exact lengths and that have radicals in the answer, and so this is how you go about getting those. All right, so that's it.